Hi there guys and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 18 Reviewed. Last time Season 17 was a return to mediocrity for the show, so I'm hoping this season can improve. Although the fact is, this is the season where the show changed its time slot in the US. And that's usually not a great sign. Usually that seems to coincide with a show on a downturn. I don't think that's going to happen here. I think the show is just going to keep doing what it's been doing. But we'll have to wait and see. Let's waste no time finding out with Season 18, Episode 1, Yacht Rocky. The family takes Peter on a cruise to relax, but they are in trouble when the boat gets capsized by a giant wave. There were 0 cutaways here, so that's easy enough. My best moment was Stewie's argument with Chris. The season opener gets a 1 out of 5. Yeah, the season kicks off in almost the worst possible way. It's like the writers were on a mission here to piss off the viewer. Why? Well, because they didn't bother to follow through and give an ending to anything they set up. Act 1 was a bunch of boring scenes at the brewery, their only purpose being to fire one of the employees, which was presumably going to be Peter, but who knows? He blacks out. And we never find out whether he got fired or not. Okay, maybe it's not the end of the world if the pivot is good. Well, the pivot here was them going on a cruise ship. Again, they set up bits which had the potential to be interesting, like Meg getting a boyfriend, but it goes nowhere because he is instantly decapitated when a wave tips over the ship. Relating to that, there is also a ridiculously long scene where Chris tries to toss his severed head up to Meg on the balcony. Okay, surely they must make something interesting out of this whole life and death situation everyone finds themselves in. Well no, they're just gonna teleport everyone back home. Once again, not bothering to write an actual ending. I don't even know whether this whole thing was meant to be real or not, given the whole thing about Casey Kasem. Man, this was just annoying. It's not worth analysing any further. There were a few okay jokes, like Donna and her disapproving friends. He don't listen to you. And I did enjoy Chris and Stewie arguing like a married couple. Still not enough to save this from its deserved 1. Season 18, Episode 2, Bri-da. Brian and Ida decide to rekindle their relationship, much to Quagmire's horror. My best cutaway here was Brian and the Russian guy trying to hide their dates by going on a space shuttle. My best moment was the monster truck rally and gun show advert. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Given this was again about the dynamic between Brian, Ida and Quagmire, this was much tamer than I expected it to be. Things were kept at a fairly slow pace, as Brian and Ida slowly got into actually becoming a proper couple. Those scenes were fine. There were some funny moments, like Brian taking Ida all the way to space, just so no one could see him with her. Of course, this does prove that, no matter how much he tries to say the contrary, Brian is still not fully comfortable with having Ida as his girlfriend, even when he does finally tell everyone. I think there is still some of that doubt in the back of his mind. The second half of the episode is not focused on that though. Rather, it honed in on how Quagmire feels about this situation. Of course he is not happy, and his anger only grows when Brian starts treating him like a kid, especially during that game of football. Finally, Quagmire just says to Ida, "Choose between me and Brian," and she chooses Quagmire. I mean, sure, whatever. I don't think either Brian or Quagmire were being great in this situation, so I can't really get mad about the choice, whatever way it went. That's it for the story. It was okay and surprisingly inoffensive given the subject matter. My favourite scene overall in the episode was the ridiculous over-the-top ad for the monster truck and gun show. Do you know that you can smoke inside? Episode 3. Absolutely babulous. Peter convinces Babs to live her life her way, so she breaks up with Carter and tries to rediscover her old self. My best cutaway here was the Grease wedding, and guess what? That was also my favourite moment. That's not because there weren't other good moments, that's just because I really liked that one. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Quite close to a 5. Finding out more about Babs is a fine idea, as her past is a bit of a untouched area, so they could go in any direction they wanted with it. The direction they chose was a good one, knowing that she wasn't actually brought up in wealth and has a more down-to-earth, mischievous side to her. It allowed her to briefly have some common ground with Peter, which is not something I ever expected to see on the show. Of course, she did go back to Carter at the end, but that is fairly realistic. She had become accustomed to the rich, luxurious lifestyle, and no longer had it in her to live any other way. But at least she got one last hurrah, as a bit of a rebel. There were plenty of funny moments here too, like Carter taking Peter out in the trash, and Chris working in a casino, with very realistic results. The greased wedding with the weird lyrics from the song, being the names of the people, was my favourite joke from the show in a while. The fact that the guy with the objection was an Asian named Mr. Chang Chang Changity Chang Shabop was very good. Episode 4, Disney's The Reboot. Family Guy looks for a makeover now that it's owned by Disney. There was only one cutaway here, and it's only even half a cutaway really, and it's Lois finding a spider in the kitchen. My best moment was Chris singing the Family Guy theme song alone. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was another one of those meta-type premises, where the characters from the show exist outside the cartoon itself. This time it all pertains to Disney's acquisition of Fox, and therefore Family Guy. I liked how they played around with the idea of Disney making a crappy rebooted version of the show. They poked fun at a lot of the different aspects seen in many modern shows. With the first show, it was how Lois was the strong woman lead, and there was a lot of racial and sexual diversity in the cast. Honestly, when it comes to the issue of diversity in TV shows and movies, as ever I feel both sides of the argument get a bit carried away, but there is still an element of truth in both sides. I do think some shows nowadays do have diversity for diversity's sake, and some groups have become overrepresented as a result. That being said, there are people who call any black character or gay character as just woke and automatically rubbish, especially if it's the main character. That's just being offended for the sake of it at that point. There always has been characters of different genders, races and sexualities throughout history, just maybe not as common as it is nowadays. As ever, to me, the main thing is the character actually interesting? That's the only thing that matters really. If the character is interesting, then I'll be happy. If it's not interesting, then I won't bother watching, regardless of what diversity the character may or may not have. Anyway, back to this episode. They took multiple jabs at Fox throughout, and also touched on the idea of only having the least popular character on the show, which apparently is Chris. He's just there singing the intro by himself. This was a very watchable episode, but because of the format, it wasn't amazingly funny. Episode 5, Cat Fight. Quagmire opens a cat cafe, so Brian tries to get it shut down. My best cutaway here was Stewie and Brian's fibre commercial, where they had to find code words for pooping. And my best moment was Brian being an emotional support animal for Quagmire. This one gets a 3 out of 5. There was quite a lot going on, and while nothing here was explored in great detail, I still found some bits interesting. For example, Quagmire starting a cat cafe was a fun turn of events. It suits him too. We all know he's got a soft spot for cats. Brian going out of his way to have it shut down was not such a good look, but he got some karma because all animals ended up being banned from public places. Just when it looked like they might be diving deeper into that, Stewie comes up with the idea of letting Brian be his emotional support animal so he can go places. But that idea is soon abandoned as Stewie disappears horror movie style. In the end, things come full circle as Quagmire, at his wit's end, having to deal with all the cats in his house, comes across Brian. They have a nice little moment actually, where Quagmire says he was just trying to do something to make people happy. So Brian puts his emotional support vest back on and lets Quagmire take him for a walk. Maybe this will squash their rivalry a bit going forward. I kind of hope it does, to be honest. There was also something about Lois and the kids attending a Christian camp, which they eventually escaped from. I didn't find this particularly interesting, and once again it had the message that religious people are idiots, basically. That's a very lazy message, and not one which is even true anyway. There's plenty of religious people who are not idiots. If I had to pick out a favourite joke here, it was the fibre commercial, where they had to find ways to censor themselves. There's so much regular. Episode 6. Peter and Lois's wedding. Peter and Lois tell the kids the story of how they met and fell in love, as well as how their wedding almost never happened. Once again, there were 0 cutaways. My favourite moment was the return of Peter with Beavis and Butthead. This one gets a 2 out of 5. So this followed in the Simpsons' footsteps and did a 90s retelling of Peter and Lois's wedding. In fairness, at least their wedding has never been fully covered on a show, so it's a bit easier to accept. While the premise may be easier to accept, I found it much harder to accept all the crazy backstory, from Carter getting a celebrity to kiss Peter, to Peter and Quagmire trying to start this business, as well as Lois almost marrying Tom Tucker. It's all a bit much and a bit unbelievable, especially when none of this had ever been so much as hinted at on the show before. At least it showed Peter and Lois did at one point care about each other, which does line up to what was shown in the past. Sadly, this was not a funny episode, again with no cutaways at all. The return of Peter with Beavis and Butthead being the best bit. His laugh with them is always good value. Episode 7. Heartburn. The Griffins recount their own versions of 3 well-known love stories. My best cutaway was Carter won't play host to a family feud, and best moment was Stewie saying it's just been revoked after shooting Alex. This 3-parter gets a 3 out of 5. First things first, I quite like how the setup here was that the Wi-Fi had dropped, rather than the TV was out, showing off the changing of the times since the earlier episodes. The first part was not a story I was familiar with, but it did make nice use of the Greek imagery. The Romeo and Juliet part did hit all the main bits from the story, but the jokes were the weakest out of all the segments in my opinion. Their go-to was to point out that Romeo and Juliet were meant to be aged like 15 and 13. They kept going on about how society now views this tale as classy, rather than creepy. Of course that's true to some extent. Romeo and Juliet was a product of its time in that sense, but they didn't have to keep hammering that point home. And whether you like it or not, even today people that age are hooking up together all the time. It is what it is. What I did kind of like is how they poked fun at how seriously their relationship was taken, especially when Juliet said, "Oh no, the boy I knew for a couple of days is dead. How can I possibly go on living?" type of thing. Even though I mentioned teenagers often do hook up together, it's almost never like serious love at that point. The final Fatal Attraction parody was, okay. Mainly for the ending, where Stewie has to finish off the crazy woman Alex, because the other two foolishly turned their back on her. Bringing back the "it's been revoked" line from Lois kills Stewie was great. Overall, for a 3-parter, this was fairly decent, mainly because it had a number of nice jokes. She's nothing like Medusa. One look at her and I'm rock hard. There's Peter complaining that Disney won't allow them to use Hercules, despite their ownership of Family Guy. Also the audience on Family Feud being only versions of Peter. He knows the audience well, you see. Episode 8. Shanksgiving. Peter and the guys get arrested to avoid Thanksgiving with their families. My best cutaway was Quagmire's sex dolls. And my best moment was the brother of Superintendent Chalmers getting the guys arrested. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was close to a 2 because the story lacked any kind of impact and the jokes were about average. I do think it was a decent idea for all the guys to try and get out of Thanksgiving work by committing a minor crime to put them in jail for a few days. It was also funny how so many other dads also had the same idea, which meant that the jails were overflowing, so they got sent to a rough prison instead. The time in the prison was full of the type of jokes you might expect, and not that interesting. That includes the weird Stewie subplot of him apparently getting married to prisoners. The ending was meant to have Peter realise how good he had it, and learn to appreciate his family more. It did kind of do that, but at the same time, how much can Peter really care about Lois when he had another version of her while in prison? Other moments I did like here were the guys quickly shutting down, Joe's attempts to be the leader, and Quagmire's Thanksgiving dinner with just Ida and a bunch of blow-up sex dolls. It almost made me feel bad for him. Episode 9. Christmas is coming. Meg gets too excited from sitting on Santa's lap, so goes on a tour of different malls to try and find him again. Meanwhile, Stewie deals with the trauma of the experience. There were only 2 cutaways here, so I guess the best of them was the dampness at Subway when they make the bread. Somewhat true, I suppose. My best moment was Peter dabbing his brow with a handkerchief during his talk with Meg. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was a very weird episode, especially for a Christmas themed one. Meg has to take Stewie to the mall Santa, only for him to get traumatized by the experience. This is because Meg seems to have some kind of orgasm from being bounced on Santa's knee. Again, it's weird, but the visual of her face next to a horrified Stewie was somewhat funny by itself. After this interaction though, the rest of the episode was slow paced. Much of it was Meg going from mall to mall, trying to find the same guy as before. This whole middle section was lacking in jokes, but I did like Peter's sit down with Meg. Not only was it surprisingly warm and genuine, Peter dabbing himself with a handkerchief as Meg was telling him all this erotic stuff was very funny. Oh stars! Meg does finally find the same guy in the end, only for it to apparently be the real Santa, whose sleigh is a crappy rundown car. It was an okay ending, even if it made little sense. It was also nice to see Brian restore Stewie's faith in Christmas by pretending to be Santa, even if it led to him discovering Stewie and Chris want a new dog. Episode 10. Connie Celica. Lois gets a job as the school's new music teacher, and soon becomes the target of Connie's bullying. My best cutaway was Brian trying to stand up to the squirrels, and best moment was Peter's rant on what he will be missing out on when Lois goes to jail. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. For starters, I'm glad they used Lois's background as a piano teacher for a story again. It seemed that side of her character was completely forgotten over the years, so having her become the school music teacher was an interesting way to bring it back. Not much came out of it, however. Certainly no reaction from either Chris or Meg on how it affected them, short of one scene of Meg being embarrassed. Instead, things switched to Lois getting into it with Connie. I don't find Connie funny very often, and this was no exception. Her trying to get back at Lois for getting her expelled ended up feeling surprisingly tame. Same for the ending where Connie apparently faked her death. None of that was shown, the family just find out on the news, and Lois gets blamed for it. Thankfully there were at least some nice jokes here to make up for the typical lack of story depth, like Joe going to tell Peppa Pig's parents that she was apparently the pig Connie used to fake her death. That was so out of nowhere, but I like how it was done in the Peppa Pig art style. I also liked Stewie following Brian into his cutaway to observe how he failed to put the squirrels in their place. And again, Peter's diatribe about Lois going to prison while she was right there in the car, I found funny. Episode 11. Short Cuts. Brian meets an old friend by the name of George Townsend. George convinces him that not being neutered is holding him back. Meanwhile, Lois gets a new haircut Peter disapproves of. My best cutaway was the dirty fighting kid in Brian's karate class. and my best moment was Peter and Lois making up. This one gets yet another 3 out of 5. Both stories here had at least one thing you could grab onto. I was not a fan of Lois's new hairstyle myself, but Peter did take his dislike of it way too far. It was kind of funny seeing them try to one-up each other by doing silly, annoying things, and it was all kind of made worthwhile and tolerable by the fact they make up in the end with some rather aggressive, rough sex. Peter still hates her hair though. Brian getting tricked by an old friend to have his balls cut off was more engaging than it sounds on paper, mainly because they touched a bit on his backstory before he met Peter. His life prior to joining the Griffins is mostly shrouded in mystery, outside of his very early life, on the farm that is. Stewie coming to save the day is something we see all the time at this point, but this time he only half saved the day I suppose, because Brian did apparently lose one testicle. The jokes here were about average I would say. Brian thinking he was going to have revenge on the Karate Kid, only for him to pull out a sword, was quite something. Episode 12. Undergrounded. Peter is grounded by Lois for acting like a child. Desperate to escape the house, he builds a tunnel all the way to the clam. My best cutaway was Peter kicking the black belt girl, and best moment was Peter screwing around with the neighborhood's internet connection. This one finally breaks the streak of 3s in a positive way. It gets a 4 out of 5. The conflict between Peter and Lois may not have much emotional weight behind it, as let's face it, it never does at this point in the show, but Lois at least had valid reasons to be mad at him. He is constantly lying and acting like a child, so grounding him was kind of an appropriate punishment. Peter of course is having none of this, and somehow digs a tunnel from his house to the clam, a tunnel which eventually collapses in on him, as well as the unfortunate Quagmire Cleveland and Joe. It was a dramatic ending that came out of nowhere, but Peter ended up at least admitting that he is prone to acting like a jerk. The main reason this got a 4 is I found a fair few jokes funny. The small fourth wall break-in, calling out Meg/Mila for mentioning her new show, was unexpected, as was the brutality of Peter kicking the girl at karate class. She shouldn't have been strutting around with that trophy. I also like the role reversal of the giant lobster boiling Peter. Don't worry, that's just air escaping. They can't feel anything. There's also Tom Brady apparently throwing a pass so good it caused Joe to walk. That was pretty amusing, even if we never got a visual for it. As I said though, Peter messing around with everyone's internet was great, mainly for everyone's pissed off reaction to it. Joe screaming "Bonnie" was the best of them. Episode 13. Rich Old Stewie. We see everyone many years in the future, and a now wealthy Stewie goes to visit a dying Peter. My best cutaway was the President Polar Bear, and best moment overall was the ending. This one gets a second 4 out of 5 in a row. This fully committed to its futuristic plot. It didn't deviate with side plots or cutaways. That made it easier to fully focus on and get more invested in. Now it did take a while to get going. Stewie living his rich old life was not that interesting to me, but I did enjoy the reunions with all the Griffin family members, seeing what they were up to all these years. The answer was not too much really. Although Chris teaching his penis to talk and Meg testing out bulletproof vests were both impressive in a perverse kind of way. There were lots of nice jokes here too, like Cleveland on hold to United Airlines for years, and the bit about the subtitles lagging behind, not to mention Stewie looking up Peter and Brian's search history. I did think the ending here worked well, how the family thought they had conned Stewie out of his money by faking Peter's death, only for him to be wise to it and blow up the entire house. It was all in his imagination, but so what? I enjoyed the ride. Episode 14. The Movement. People mistakenly think Peter is kneeling for the national anthem, causing him to get a position at Nike as an activist. My best cutaway here was more uncomfortable than two sports announcers in a too small booth. My best moment was Peter's Nike commercial. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was an eventful, yet odd episode. Peter kneeling down, needing to go to the bathroom during the anthem, getting him mistaken for some kind of activist, was a clever idea, and one which makes sense for him. But they never really committed to that side of things. They certainly never took this in too much of a political direction, which is probably for the best, given this was a few years late on the whole Colin Kaepernick controversy. Much of the middle portion was dull, frankly. I didn't care too much about either Carter's opinions or the black folk who Peter was trying to suck up to, just so he could earn himself hero status. The whole thing at least ended in a somewhat funny way, where Peter replaces the US anthem with the hamster dance. I would be all for it, not gonna lie. You can certainly replace my country's anthem with that any day. I despise England's national anthem. The US one isn't anything special, but it's better than England's. The other standout moment here was, of course, the Nike commercial. It's one of the best, most memorable moments ever on this show in my opinion. The longer and more outrageous the ad got, the better it got. Don't let Kenneth walk out of your life. Take his life from him. That was so funny. But yeah, overall this was a strange one. It had like two great things, but other than that was a bit mediocre. Episode 15. Baby Stewie. Brian tells Stewie that he will lose his intelligence at puberty, just like Chris did. So Stewie decides to stop the process by rearranging his DNA, but ends up reverting himself to a normal baby. My best cutaway was helping Sylvester Stallone get ready, and best moment overall was Brian trying to use Stewie's machine to get him back to normal. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Like most episodes involving Stewie's gadgets, there were interesting moments here. The bit with the family in the escape room at the start was okay. How Peter and Lois are so bad, their kids have to do everything for them. I kind of wish we got to see the other families doing the escape rooms. As for the main part of the episode, it was fun seeing Brian have to deal with Stewie as a regular baby, and all the different things Stewie turns into as Brian desperately tries to return him back. The ending was very predictable because there is only so much you can do with this type of story. Things indeed have to go back to normal, so any kind of suspense here was non-existent. Brian lying to Stewie was not made into a big deal, probably because he does it so often. Things also ended early, so much so, they had to fill the last 2 and a bit minutes with an underwhelming Cleveland short. So that, along with not many great jokes, means the best I can give this is a 3. Episode 16. Start Me Up. Brian, Chris and Stewie create a Kickstarter campaign for a film. Meanwhile, Peter's boss suggests that he works from home due to his sweating. My best moment here is also my favourite cutaway. Peter claims the only time he lies is when he plays poker. This one is a 2 out of 5. This is one of those episodes I have very little to say about. Everything felt like going through the motions. Peter working at home never brought up many interesting situations, and ended with Peter and Lois realising that they need to spend most of the day away from each other for their marriage to function. That's not an ideal state of affairs, is it? The other 3 using a Kickstarter to get the funds to write a crappy movie also felt underwhelming. I guess Chris's incompetence at playing his character was mildly amusing, but no more than that. The only joke I liked was Peter playing poker. His mirrored sunglasses giving away his cards was quite funny, but the call he got was the cherry on top. I have no idea why he would write a contact down as secret gay boyfriend. Like, why would he need to specify that if he's trying to keep it secret? I know that's part of the joke, but still it plays into Peter's stupidity. Episode 17. Coma Guy. The giant chicken challenges Peter to a drag race, where he smashes into a tree, falling into a coma. causing him to undergo a series of dreams and hallucinations. My best cutaway was more high maintenance than a white woman on vacation, and best moment being the DJ Dr. Hartman hired to tell the kids Peter was in a coma. This one gets a 2 out of 5. I can see this maybe being an episode most people like better than I do. Exploring Peter's mind while in a coma had the potential to be good, however there didn't seem to be much point to any of it. That is my main gripe. Sure, going through some of the famous moments from the show, like the Godfather conversation and the redo of the frog in the window scene, were okay I guess, as was the DJ at the hospital, but when Peter wakes up, only to end up arguing with Lois about her trying to pull the plug because she was told to, it all ends up feeling so hollow, probably because it made everything that happened before so redundant. The final lesson they all take away is that families are meant to fight and want to kill each other. It's kind of hard for me to get behind that message. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. Episode 18, Better Off Meg. When Meg is believed to be dead, she decides to leave the family. Out of the two that were here, my favourite cutaway was Stewie and Brian ditching Meg's funeral to play games at Chuck E. Cheese. My best moment was Meg using the fake name Natalie Hallway when starting her new life. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. They tried to do something with the characters here. Meg, feeling disgruntled with life at home, takes advantage of a misunderstanding to start a new life with her family all thinking she's dead. The best part of the episode for me was the one scene we got of Meg making new friends under the name Natalie Hallway. I found the name quite funny, honestly. Not only how she got the name by looking down the hallway, but it's also a reference to Natalie Holloway, who was a girl who went missing in real life. Some may find it distasteful, but I'm all for a bit of dark humour, especially if it's somewhat creative. Sadly, Meg living her new life got cut short. She instead got kidnapped by Chris, who was being unlikable all episode long. He wanted to keep the popularity he got because of everyone's sympathy for him losing his sister. The bit where Meg bangs her head on the floor to bleed a river of blood was honestly a bit uncomfortable, a bit cringeworthy, and I rarely ever cringe at that type of thing. The main reason I came away annoyed here is because they tried to do the whole the family go on without Meg for a while and find out what they were missing out on type of deal. But throughout they never showed they cared about her at all. They literally mistake her for a barrel, for God's sake. Even after Meg crashes her own memorial at the school, everyone still ignores her and treats her like she's dead anyway. I don't come away buying that anyone will actually treat her any better because of this. So what's the point? Episode 19, Holly Bibble. 3 Bible stories are told from a Family Guy perspective. Now, there were 3 cutaways here, but frankly none of them stood out to me. Didn't particularly like any of them, so none are getting the recognition. My best moment was Brian and Stewie screwing up the Last Supper. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This was indeed a biblical themed trilogy episode. It lacked much imagination. They went through the motions, ticking off the basics of Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and the Last Supper. There were multiple jabs at the Bible throughout, pointing out certain things which seemed to not make much logical sense. And to be fair, describing the Bible as Harry Potter for stupid people, I found a somewhat funny line, even if I don't agree with that sentiment. Also, as I said, I liked how much of a mess the Last Supper turned out to be. Damn, was Stewie horny for men though. I know he has his gay moments, but he was practically gagging to kiss them here. Sadly, the rest of the episode was forgettable, with no real positives to find. None of the jokes or cutaways were that funny, and the family trapped in a motel during a torrential downpour was about as exciting as that would be in real life. This episode wasn't as successful as Snake Quagmire, tricking Peter and Lois. It was about as successful as Peter's attempts at gathering the animals for his ark. Episode 20, Movin' In, Principal Shepherd's song. Principal Shepherd loses his job and moves in with the Griffin family. Meanwhile, Stewie writes a uncomplimentary book about a dumb dog based on Brian. I have the same best moment and cutaway here. thankfully for the right reason this time, being that I enjoyed the joke so much, and it was Stewie with the witches in Salem. The season finale gets a 4 out of 5. At least both stories here had some character stuff I was fairly engaged with most of the way. Principal Shepherd goes on a rather hypocritical fat-shaming rant about Chris, which is mistakenly aired over the intercom. So after some complaining, he gets fired. Makes sense? Well, him getting fired does. Not everyone caring more about that than school shootings. After giving a slimy political apology to Chris, he ends up living with the Griffins for a bit, and tries to run the place like it's a school, even going so far as to lock the family in the basement as a punishment. He does get his job back in the end, which is probably for the best, as he is usually at least somewhat of a funny character, and they are really leaning into him in recent seasons. The only thing that wasn't great is how they never showed how they escaped the basement. Stewie writing what seems like a children's picture book depicting Brian as a idiot predictably brought those two into conflict. We got a lot of Stewie acting like a baby and Brian acting like a dog, which is always good. I especially enjoyed the bits in court. Stewie was being a bit of a knob, so I don't mind Brian writing a book about him to get him back. The main reason this gets a 4 is I found a number of jokes funny. I liked Stewie referencing the famous Bugs Bunny opera scene, Peter trying to act like a cool high school kid. There's also everyone's shocked reaction to Meg shouting, "Allahu Akbar." That was so out of the blue. My favourite of all though was the cutaway of Stewie at the Salem witch trials, how he was exposed as not actually wanting anything sexual with the woman and wanting her executed as a witch for telling the truth. I found this a nice way to end the season. Welcome guys to the season 18 summary. The breakdown goes like this. The overall average score was a 2.85. My bottom 5 episodes were Coma Guy at 5, Better Off Meg at 4, Holly Bibble at 3, Start Me Up at 2, and Yacht Rocky as the lone 1 out of 5. My top 5 were Disney's The Reboot at 5, Movin' In, Principal Shepherd's Song at 4, Undergrounded at 3, Rich Old Stewie at 2, and Absolutely Babulous as the best of the year. So the rating suggests this is a slightly below average, mediocre type of season, and that's definitely what it felt like to sit through. There was not much variation in episode score. There were lots of 3s basically, half the season was in fact, with some 2s and 4s scattered in between. In some ways that makes it even more annoying, as it gives me less to talk about. I can't fully rip into this season for serving up some of the worst episodes ever, but I also can't praise it for having any great ones. It was just dull and mundane, whatever way you look at it. As well as continuing the trend of having minimal cutaways, this season also had the annoying habit of abandoning certain plot points mid-episode and acting like it never happened. You can maybe get away with this now and again, but when it's done so often, it makes everything feel pointless and a waste of time. As you can tell by not only the content of this review, but also by how it was delayed, my patience with and motivation for Family Guy is at an all-time low. A lot of you guys have been asking me about this in the comments, so here's my stance on it. The purpose of this channel was always for me to have fun doing what I'm doing, and I will never compromise on that. So to be honest, I considered giving up this project altogether. But then I got to thinking, and I realised that I don't really want to quit. I've come this far, 18 seasons in, and I've only got what, 5 more seasons before I'm caught up? So it would feel a bit silly to completely abandon it now. So I came up with a solution, a compromise I'm happy with. I'm going to start up a new every episode review series, and run it concurrently with this one. I will alternate between the two, like 1 month it will be the new series, the next it will be Family Guy, and on it will go like that until I'm caught up. That will provide me with enough breaks from Family Guy to get me through to the end, I think. I hope you guys are okay with that. I know it will mean the Family Guy series takes a little longer to finish, but at least this way, it probably will get finished. If you're wondering what the new series will be, it's gonna be South Park. It was always the plan to cover South Park, Family Guy and The Simpsons on the channel, and I am looking forward to covering it as it is one of my all-time faves. You can expect it starting sometime in the near future. No exact date because this whole Family Guy delay has kind of messed with my timing. But if any of you are South Park fans, you have something to look forward to. And even if you are not, you can always give it a try anyway if you just like my videos. In the meantime, of course, I will still keep putting out the Powerpuff Girls reviews on the regular, so content is not stopping on the channel. Thanks for bearing with me for this video, and my explanation of what's happening, and as always, thanks for watching. Take care guys.